Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. And welcome. I'm delighted to have so many of you here in the room today. And we are talking today about one of the most significant changes that childhood itself has been through since the Industrial Revolution. Perhaps the biggest change that childhood has been through since the Industrial Revolution. And last year, that change reached a tipping point. Here it is. For the majority of children in more developed parts of the world, last year reached a tipping point where they spent the majority of their waking hours interacting with a screen. And just pause for a moment and think about the significance of that. We're actually doing childhood in a radically different way from when any of us were growing up. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. And before we begin, though, I wanted to, and hopefully this changes the slides, maybe I'll have to do it on here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I care about this subject. So when I was 12, I went to this school, and it was seen as a great privilege to go to this school, and I was the youngest child in the school, and my parents were not of the same social standing as the other parents. And for the next 4 years, my life was one of continuous bullying. And back then, it wasn't really called bullying, it was just called going to school. But it clearly, indelibly left a mark on me those 4 years, and it drove me to become a champion for human rights, and I trained as a human rights barrister in London and served on the board of Amnesty International. And it led me also, as I grew older, to reflect on what had happened to me in those 4 years at school. And I got more and more interested in psychology, and I did a master's course in psychology. And one of the things they ask you to do is to study the effects of a relevant experience on you. And I thought, I'm going to study what happens to people who've been bullied. This is many years ago now. And it was chilling to hear the stories of people coming forward. They would come forward and said, I feel I have a sign on my back saying I'm a loser. And so many of them talked about their struggles in adult life to find acceptance, to find a sense of belonging. And it was that research experience that led me to change direction. And I started an anti-bullying organization in the US called No Bully, which grew and became one of the biggest anti-bullying organizations in the US. And as I did that work, increasingly, I was hearing, as so many of you have heard, these heartbreaking stories of cyberbullying. Something seems to happen when children go online. If I can't see the whites of your eyes, my empathy tends to fade to zero. And when bullying goes online, it starts to spread in a very viral way. And it's very, very hard then to reverse the spread of it and to reverse the effects of it. And this year in particular, we've seen some very chilling things around cyberbullying. So I want to give a shout out to Jacqueline Boucher, who's at the back of the room there. I don't know if you want to wave for a moment. But Jacqueline Boucher, while she was the safety officer at Microsoft, pioneered a measurement tool to measure what is going on online in terms of how we treat each other. And they called that the Digital Civility Index. And it's been going now for, I think, about 4 years, 5 years? 6 years, congratulations. And it tracks across many countries what is happening online, both for children and for adolescents. And what the index is showing for this year, this study was done in March of this year, and the full results will be released on Internet Safety Day, which is in February of next year, shows an incredible, significant increase, sadly, in digital civility online. That's echoed by the Pew Internet study, which was done in the US last year, which found an incredible, horrendous 25% of adults in the US are now reporting severe online harassment. 25%. That's appalling. And In the UK, we've been tracking the stats on bullying. 27%, again, that's going up. 20%, 27% of teenagers now report being the target of online bullying. And for tweens, it's not much better. So have many of you heard Samir Hinduja's talk this morning on cyberbullying? He's a wonderful man and dedicated his life to tracking these data. So for tweens, it's not that much better. For tweens, it's 21% of American tweens are reporting being the target of cyberbullying. So I don't know what about you, but I find these numbers just chilling. And a few years back, I've been talking to enough people in this field and in the field of children's well-being to say we need to actually do a focused initiative on this. And we got together. I'm going to come to that in a moment. Yeah, there's some good slides here on the why bullying causes so much harm. And from the psychological point of view, this is William James, who's the father of US psychology. The effect of social exclusion, which is so much the part of bullying, denial of friendship, being put on the outside, is as severe as body torture. It's a great quote here. And if you've not seen that quote before, take a photograph of it because I think it's so compelling. And what's really prescient about this quotation is that researchers such as Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA in the US have been tracking what are the effects of social exclusion. And now, of course, we can do fMRI scans of someone's brain as they're going through a social exclusion experiment. And what Naomi Eisenberger found is that the same parts of the brain light up when we are socially excluded, as if we're physically in danger. There are fundamental neurological effects when we go through trauma, and bullying is a form of trauma. And this is as true online and offline. So the effects of bullying can be mapped out through that same lens of trauma. So if you want to know what's going on in the brain of one of the people you're working with at schools or you're researching as researchers, there are 5 fairly predictable responses that we go to when we've been the subject of bullying. One is the fight response, which online you can see in the Twitter wars, but it gets vicious. It gets into doxing and threats upon your life and publication of your personal data with the encouragement to go and do harm to you. There's also a classic flight response, and you see that online with people saying, I'm going to quit all social media. This is just the most toxic environment ever. I do not want to be part of it. That's an understandable but very psychological driven response to being bullied online. The freeze response you see both online and offline. You might call it depression, but online you see it in the people with the deer in the headlights look who won't seek help because they're just numb. They're frozen. They don't know what to do. They won't seek help. They won't get off their platform. They won't protect themselves. They won't exclude people who are cyberbullying them online. And then you get classic submit responses, which you might classify as victimization responses. And then there are the students who are extraordinarily clinging. They seek an adult. They're desperate for help. This is the landscape that we're working in with here. This is the effects on our young people who are the target of cyberbullying. And for many of us, we wanted to launch a global initiative to address this. So a few years back, I invited 25 people to London to solve for this question. How do we solve cyberbullying across the world? Cyberbullying transcends divisions of country for obvious reasons, and therefore any response to it has to also transcend those national boundaries. Jacqueline Boucher was there in the room. I should have a photograph of you up here, sorry, but some of our esteemed colleagues are also up here, and we spent, UNESCO was there, UNICEF was there, and various NGOs from around the world. And as we looked at this question, how do we solve for cyberbullying? It's a really important question. We realized that we had to start young. And the reason we realize that is that if you start to map out what's happening with internet use across the world, childhood is moving online. And for those of us who grew up in the 1970s, our first average screen time interaction was 4 years. 4 years old, television. Now it's 4 months old. That's the average time when a child starts going online. It'll be the phone being held up to them. They're talking to their grandmother somewhere else, but they are being exposed to the online world. 200,000 children go online for the first time every day. And by the time they're 8 in more developed countries, children average about 5 hours a day online. That's from Common Sense Media. But under lockdown, because school went remote, those numbers by many estimates doubled. So that's where I gave you that extraordinarily alarming statistic that the majority of children now spend the majority of their waking hours online. There is somewhat of a retrenchment to that since the pandemic and as schools started to operate as normal, but it's only somewhat of an entrenchment, and the direction of childhood is increasingly to an online childhood. So if we're going to really address online bullying, we have to start young, and we have to make sure that children are equipped with the skills and values that they need to navigate an increasingly online world. So for our group in London, we took intentionally the route of education as one of the levers that we can pull that we consider to be one of the most effective ways of supporting children in this online-offline world in which they're operating in. And we then had the task of having to identify what are the skills that this generation needs. So for all of us, when we grew up, emotional regulation was the most important skill of childhood. And that still remains the case. But in an online world, the challenge of an online world is that it can be inherently emotionally dysregulating. What I mean by that is that you saw this under lockdown, if you give a child a device and they spend hours on that device, it depends partly on what apps they're on, you get, did you see this, some pretty cranky children? Yeah? You get some children that seem, their nerves seem much thinner, much more reactive. So emotional regulation needs to be in the mix in terms of how we're teaching children life skills. But we brought together some of the leading thinkers on children and technology. Samir Hinduja is part of our advisory group. And we said, what are the skills that this generation needs? What I want to share with you now is this map, this power wheel of the skills that this generation is going to need. And skills that were not so taught before are now coming to the fore. So for this generation, in the world of deep fakes, they have to learn who they can trust, what they can believe. That's the skill of critical thinking. They need to build their resilience because the risks side of the internet, the exposure to unwanted contact, disturbing content is even greater. The amplification of cyberbullying from regular bullying is even greater. This generation is going to need resilience like no one else. And then there's also the importance of creating an internet where everyone belongs. So that's where inclusivity and kindness come to the fore. You cannot just teach children the technical skills of how you operate online. If you do that, you'll have a generation of self-centered technocrats. You need also to be teaching them values in that context. Values extend online as much as offline. So that's what we are about. We want to teach children essentially how to use their agency well, to use their powers well. And when we looked at the great exemplars of how to use your power well, that's a really good question. And we looked at people like Malala, and we looked at Mahatma Gandhi, and we looked at Nelson Mandela, and we said, what characterizes the good use of power? And for you who work in the bullying space, that's probably a fundamental, but also a fairly simple question to answer. Because people who use their power well do it with zero violence and zero hate and zero bullying. So we put that together and said, we're teaching a generation how to use their power well with zero violence, zero hate, and zero bullying. We're going to call this global initiative the Power of Zero. So that's what I'm presenting to you today, the Power of Zero. We are a global collaborative campaign. We bring together NGOs from around the world. Friends is one of our partners in bringing this to Sweden. We're building out books and lessons and games that reach children across multiple platforms. Because if you really want to teach a generation, it doesn't happen just in school, and it doesn't happen just at home, and it doesn't happen just online. It happens in all of those places at the same time. And I'm proud of the growing collaboration that's getting behind this campaign. And I'm thinking there may be some NGOs that want to join us in this journey. We take this country by country as we build this out, and we're looking for NGOs who want to bring it to their country and teach children really the life skills that they're going to need to succeed in this very different world. So I deliberately tried to get through that as fast as I could because I wanted to take any questions and I wanted to hear from all of you. And I believe there's a microphone here you can use, and I think I can just turn it on and give it to you. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Because it's only by working together that we're going to change the future for our children. Yeah. Yes, so I think you can just talk into that.
Thank you. I'm not sure, but it's a bit late, so you might have said it. But did you see any difference with when the kids had emotions all over outside their body, if they do it online in the classroom or gaming? Because I see it, what you mean with my kids, but do they also get that if you sit a whole day online in classroom?
Right. Thank you. So thank you for your question, and I think it's a very important question, and it goes back to this fundamental distinction, which is really important, which is as determinant how you spend your time online as the amount of time, the length of time that you spend online. So I think it's been challenging for children to spend so much time online. One of my neighbors in London, who's the mother of 3 young children, was trying to juggle them all and had them all in separate rooms online. And she went into her young child's bedroom, who is supposed to be at the desk with his teacher online, and she saw him sitting under the desk, with the screen on top, under the desk playing with his Lego. So it's been challenging, but clearly the content matters. And so a lot of what we're looking at is how do you teach children to have a healthy media diet? And we're starting to experiment with, this is a really fascinating exercise actually, which if you work with students, you can do it. We created a deck of cards with the logos of different apps on it, well-known apps, YouTube Kids, etc., Peppa Pig, and we also created emoticon apps, and we said to the children, please put together the right emoticon for you with the app. So with Peppa Pig, how do you feel after watching Peppa Pig? And the reason we're doing this is that we're wanting to teach children a consciousness around their own media diet, because the research shows that if you start to get children engaged on what they will do with their online time at the start of the day before they go online, first off, they follow it, or more likely to follow it, and second off, those are much more happy, pro-social kids. Any other questions or comments? So fabulous having you all here. Thank you for coming to this. And how much more time do we have? Does anyone know?
Hi, great presentation. Thank you. Do you see a difference with like kids who has MPF's diagnosis and norm functioning kids and the screen time and how it affects them?
So help us out. What's an MPS diagnosis?
Neuropsychological, is it deficiencies?
Okay.
ADHD
I don't know the stats on children with disabilities and online, so I'm not equipped to answer that. It's a very important question. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much for coming. If you want to know more about Power Zero, come and talk to me. If you want to be part of this campaign, come and talk to me. And I think we've got a very wonderful presentation right now on social media down in the main room, so that's where I'm going to be heading. Thank you.